Ever catch yourself, like, really thinking about the stories we tell ourselves?
Uh-huh.
And I don't mean, like, bedtime stories, but those deeper ones,
Mhm.
the ones about who we are, what we're capable of,
Right, right.
what we deserve, all that.
Yeah.
It's wild how much these stories shape our reality, even if they're not, totally true. So we're diving into that today. And get this, we've got a collective tarot reading centered around the Judgment card as our guide.
How much of what we believe is actually true, right?
Right.
And we've got a great example to illustrate this. We're talking about the amazing Kathy
Oh,
Bates.
she's fantastic. Love her.
Such a talented actress.
The best.
And dedicated, too. I mean, talk about a strong work ethic. And her parents, they were her biggest supporters, even put their retirement on hold so she could pursue acting.
Wow, now that's dedication
Yeah.
from everyone involved. Really shows how much people will sacrifice to chase their dreams.
Absolutely. And all that support made her success that much sweeter. Because, get this, she lands the role of Annie Wilkes in Misery.
No way.
Yes.
Iconic.
Talk about a powerful performance, and she wins an Oscar for it.
Well-deserved.
Yeah.
That's like reaching the peak of achievement in film.
Exactly. But here's where things get really interesting. Years later, Bates is giving an interview, and she's talking about winning the Oscar. She's convinced that, in all the excitement, she forgot to thank her mother. Can you imagine?
Oh, wow. I can't even imagine the guilt from that.
Right?
To think you forgot someone so important on such a huge stage.
It ate at her for years. She felt like she'd let down the people who'd given up so much for her.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
But then they decide to play the Oscar clip back during the interview.
Oh, I bet that was a tense moment.
Talk about an intense moment, and guess what?
What happened?
She thanked her mother, clear as day. Bates was floored, seeing that false memory crumble. You could see how much it shook her.
Wow.
So what's going on in our brains? How can we hold on to these false narratives so strongly?
That is the million-dollar question. And the reality is, our brains aren't these perfect video recorders capturing every detail. Memories are a lot more fluid and easily influenced than we realize.
So it's not like hitting play on a recording. Our memories aren't that straightforward.
Not at all. It's way more nuanced. Much more to it than that. But we can break it down.
Okay, so our memories aren't as reliable as we might think. How does that work? What's going on in our brains when we misremember something so completely, like with Kathy Bates and the Oscars?
It's really fascinating, actually. Imagine this. Every time you recall a memory, it's like you're taking a fragile object off a shelf. You're dusting it off, looking it over, then putting it back. But in that handling, things can get shifted around a bit.
Shifted around.
Yeah. So our emotions, our current biases, even new information we've picked up since the event happened, it can all subtly change the memory itself.
It's like our brains are always editing our memories without us knowing.
Ex-
So, in Kathy Bates's case, maybe the intensity of winning the Oscar, all those emotions. Maybe it clouded the memory of thanking her mom. What do you think?
Absolutely. And then over time, that slightly distorted memory, it becomes her reality, just because she's replayed it so many times without questioning it.
That's kind of unsettling, right? To think our memories can be so easily manipulated, even by ourselves. Makes you wonder how many of us are walking around with these stories about ourselves that might not even be completely true.
It's a question we all grapple with, I think.
So what can we do about it? Are we just stuck with these flawed narratives playing on a loop?
Well, the good news is we're not stuck. Recognizing it, becoming aware of this tendency, that's a huge first step. And from there, we can start to cultivate a little self-compassion, recognizing that our memories, while powerful, aren't always the most reliable narrators.
Self-compassion is so important, and I know one of our sources talks about self-forgiveness too. What role does that play in all of this?
It's essential. But it's not about letting ourselves off the hook. It's more about recognizing that we are all works in progress, always evolving. We make the best choices we can with the information we have in that moment.
Right.
And as we grow, learn new things, our perspectives change. So it's important not to judge our past selves too harshly based on what we understand now. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually practice self-forgiveness, especially when it comes to these deeply ingrained stories, the ones that might be holding us back?
Well, one technique I find really powerful is called cognitive reframing. It's about consciously choosing to look at those old stories, but through a more compassionate lens.
A more compassionate lens. So how would that work?
Okay, let's say you have a recurring story about a time you messed up, and you still feel awful about it, even if it was years ago.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Right. So with cognitive reframing, you'd start by acknowledging the mistake, but then you actively look for the lessons you learned from that experience. You might even try to find something good that came from it, even indirectly.
So instead of focusing on the negative, you're
Exactly.
trying to find those little bits of growth, those positive things that came out of it.
Yes. It's about rewriting the narrative, not by denying the past, but by infusing it with understanding, with compassion for the person you were at the time.
It sounds like it takes effort, though, to reframe those stories we tell ourselves.
It does take effort, you're right.
Yeah.
But it's so worth it. And remember, this isn't about being perfect or erasing our pasts. It's about making peace with our imperfections, extending the same grace to ourselves that we often give so freely to others.
It's funny you mentioned grace because I know one of the sources we're looking at today mentioned this idea of ensuring that the stories you tell yourself are ones that reflect grace and light.
Oh, that's a beautiful way to put it. Because it really gets at the power we have to choose the narratives that shape our lives. We can pick stories fueled by regret and self-criticism, or we can choose stories that emphasize learning, growth, self-compassion.
It's about having agency, right? We're not just passive bystanders in our own minds. We can actually examine those stories, challenge them, and rewrite them.
Exactly. And realizing that is so empowering, knowing that we have the ability to consciously shape the narratives of our own lives. That's a huge step towards living more authentically and with more compassion for ourselves and others.
That's powerful. But if our memories are so easily influenced, reshaped, how do we know which stories are actually good for us and which ones are holding us back?
That is a great question and a tricky one to answer. That's where things get really interesting.
So, how do we figure out which stories are helpful and which ones are holding us back? It's got to be tough to untangle all that.
It really is. It's not always easy to tell the difference. But one good place to start is to pay attention to how those stories make you feel. Do they leave you feeling empowered, inspired,
Okay, yeah.
like you can grow from them? Or do they make you feel kind of stuck, defeated, like you're just carrying the weight of the past around?
That makes sense. It's like we have to tune in to our own emotional responses. If a story consistently brings us down, maybe it's time to question it, see if it's really true or if it's just got this hold on us.
Exactly. That's where self-compassion is so key.
Right.
Think about it. If you were talking to a friend who was struggling with a negative story, you wouldn't tell them to dwell on it.
No way.
You'd offer support, a different perspective, maybe even challenge them to see the situation differently.
Totally. We're usually much harder on ourselves than we are on our friends, I think.
It's so true. But what if we could be as kind to ourselves as we are to the people we love?
Right. What if we could be our own best friends?
Exactly. What if you became your own biggest advocate, your own source of compassion and encouragement?
That is such a good point. So much of this comes back to shifting our perspective, right? It's not about pretending our pasts didn't happen or that we're perfect. It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress, always learning and growing.
You said it perfectly. And it's about recognizing that our stories, the ones we tell ourselves and the ones we hear out in the world, those stories have immense power. They shape our reality.
They really do.
But here's the thing. We have a choice. We can let those stories control us, or we can choose to rewrite them, to become the authors of our own lives.
And that's where this judgment card comes in, you know? In a bigger sense, it's about waking up, renewing, searching for a deeper truth. It really connects with this whole thing about examining our inner narrative.
Exactly. It's about that moment of true self-reflection,
Mm.
letting go of judging ourselves and actually embracing forgiveness.
Mm.
But how do we actually do that? It's easy to say, just drop the negative stories, but
Mhm.
actually doing it feels way harder.
Oh, for sure. It takes real effort. Just start by noticing those thoughts that keep popping up. Ask yourself, is this story really true? What actual proof do I have? You might find that a lot of these stories are stuck in the past, based on old experiences that don't reflect who you are now.
And the reading, it really emphasized self-compassion, which I think is so crucial. We got to acknowledge our mistakes without like beating ourselves up. We're all a work in progress, right?
Absolutely. We're always growing and changing. And that brings us back to the judgment card's message of self-acceptance. It's about recognizing that we can all evolve, transform. It's like stepping into a new chapter, but without the baggage of those old, outdated stories.
Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Well, I'm just really struck by this idea that we have the power to choose the stories we tell ourselves. That's really empowering.
It really is.
Mm.
Don't be afraid to question those old narratives. Rewrite them. Be kind to yourself. Stay curious and keep exploring.
So well said. It's a great reminder that our journeys and the stories we tell about them are always evolving. That's it for today's deep dive. Until next time, remember to keep questioning, keep rewriting, and as always, stay curious.